Hi, everybody. It's Harvard lawyer Lee. I've been following the Alex Murdaugh murders trial along with my subscribers. It's a month into the testimony, and the state has just finished producing all of the evidence against Alex Murdaugh. The defense is about to start its side of the case. Murdaugh is a now disbarred attorney who was accused of committing a host of financial crimes, but importantly for this case, he is also accused of killing his wife and son. The prosecution says his motive was that he thought he would distract people from the financial crimes he was committing. Alex Murdaugh's wife and 22-year-old son were killed on June 7th, 2021. What I've done is compile what I've heard the state say into a timeline. I am going to be trying to go through that in a 15-minute quick version so you can just find out quickly what exactly happened in the case, what the state's allegations are, and the basic parameters about the time when the murder happened and all of the things that happened around it. Could things on here be wrong? Absolutely. This is what I got from the trial. But please, in the comments, write me. Say, Lee, it's not 652, it was 658 or whatever. I would love to correct anything you see on here. So please be sure to put that in the comments if you see anything at all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. The timeline I did is much bigger, but my goal here is to try to keep this video to about 15 minutes. So it's very accessible for everybody who just wants to know about the case and to decide for themselves whether some of this evidence supports the allegation that Alex Murdaugh committed the murders of his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. I've highlighted in red the parts I'm going to go to because those are the parts that I think are most important for laying out the timeline right around the murders. Now, at about 7:14 and thereafter, for quite a bit of time, Paul and Alex both have a lot of steps. That's important because one of the things Alex Murdaugh told the investigators when they first arrived at the scene is that he and Paul had been walking around the property and driving around earlier in the evening. So this part does dovetail with what Alex Murdaugh told the investigators. At 7:39:55, there's an important video, and I'm going to show you just a little picture from that. Here's why this video is important. It's a video taken by Paul of his dad as they were walking around the property, and Alex Murdaugh is standing beside a tree they planted, which, as you can see, is not doing real well. What's important about this for the murders is that he's wearing a blue button-up shirt and khaki pants. That's not what he was wearing later when investigators arrived. When investigators arrived, he was wearing this, a white t-shirt and shorts. He doesn't remember exactly when he changed, but clearly he changed clothes somewhere in that process. The state says the clothes he was wearing earlier in the evening, these clothes are missing, and therefore they must have been covered with blood, and that may be why they're missing. The next point that's important is that at about 8:05, Paul, the son's phone begins moving from where they are on the property, which is at the cabin near the kennels, toward the house. Now, Moselle is a big property. I'm going to show you a quick video so you can get an idea of just how very big it is. It's a hunting lodge. What you see first in the video, and I'll run it for you one more time, what you see first is the house, and then over there you see the kennel. So let's run that one more time. That's the house where Alex Murdaugh says he was, and we're going to run around the property, and you can see all the way on the other side of the property is the kennels and several other outbuildings, and that's where Maggie and Paul were both killed. Let me share my timeline screen again. So Paul was moving from the cabin near the kennels toward the house at 8:05. And then at 8:08, Paul's phone is located at the house. Investigators got this data largely from cell phones. They also used data from GM tracking Alex Murdaugh's vehicle, which was a Chevy Suburban. So Alex Murdaugh told investigators that the family ate dinner together. And the timeline suggests that's part of his story at least was true, because at 8:08, Paul's phone is located at the house. At 8:17, Maggie unplugged her phone. She had been driving before that, and investigators figure that's probably about when she arrived at Moselle. She takes 38 steps. She probably comes into the house, and the family has a quick dinner together. The housekeeper had already made dinner, so there was no need to prepare it. It could be particularly quick for that reason. Then at 8:32, Paul takes 283 steps, which is probably Paul going back out to the kennels. That's where he and Maggie were both killed later that evening. At 8:38, Paul's phone is in fact back at the kennels. Then at 8:44 comes some pivotal time in this murder investigation. At 8:44, Paul FaceTimed his friend Rogan Smith. Rogan had left his dog at Moselle because the dog was having some kind of trouble with its tail. So Paul and Rogan were trying to FaceTime to talk about what to do about the dog with the problem tail. Would there be a vet who could help? What would they do to fix it? FaceTime was very unreliable, Rogan says, and everyone does, around Moselle. Rogan said the typical method between them was they would try to do the FaceTime. If that didn't work, Paul would take a video and then he would send it to Rogan. What's critical about this time is that Paul FaceTimes Rogan, and then he does take a video about exactly what they were talking about. But that video never gets sent. And the prosecution says right in here is about where the murders occurred. But let's keep going and see what the evidence is about when exactly it happened, if we can tell. Also critical, both for the FaceTime with Rogan as well as for the video that Paul took about the dog. For both of those, critically important. Rogan says, I believe I heard in the background as I was talking to Paul, I heard Alec and Maggie talking to each other. Alec told investigators when they arrived at the scene later that night that he had not been at the kennels, that he had stayed up at the house and taken a nap and then gone straight to his mother's house without going to the kennels. That was his alibi. So Rogan says, but I heard him in the background. Paul's video, the one that was never sent to Rogan, also has Alec's voice in the background, according to numerous prosecution witnesses. We don't know for sure what the argument will be by the defense. Thus far, they mounted no argument that that was not Alex Murdaugh. But at this point, there is a voice in the background. You can hear Maggie talking, and numerous people have said you also can hear Alec talking at 8:44 when Paul took that video, 8:44, 8:45. So at 8:49:26, Maggie at least must still have been alive because her phone unlocks and she reads a text message. Then there's a text at 8:49:35 from Rogan back to Paul that's not read. Paul, their testimony was, regularly used his phone, quickly used his phone, but now he has not yet done two things: send the video or read the text from Rogan. From 8:53 to 8:55, Maggie's phone records 59 steps, various orientation changes, and Siri and the camera activate. Now, the defense says maybe what was happening is that Maggie was trying to take a photograph of the killer, and that's why the killer then took just this phone, not Paul's, but Maggie's. Maggie's phone was found roughly a mile away on the side of the road the next day. Law enforcement found it because the family voluntarily shared the Find My iPhone data, and they were able to locate her iPhone thrown into the woods on the side of the road. Or I shouldn't say thrown, because actually that's an issue. It was on the side of the road in the woods. The prosecution says at this point, someone had picked up Maggie's phone. It was looking for facial recognition and not finding it because it was not Maggie who was using the phone. They also argued that the distance covered was really inaccurate. So although Maggie's phone is taking steps here, 59 steps, they say that's not necessarily accurate. One of the reasons that's critically important is because at 9:02 to 9:06, Alex Murdaugh is taking 283 steps, roughly the same amount it seemed to take Paul to get to the kennels. The prosecution says he was walking really fast at this point, much faster than he was earlier in the evening. He was going 70 steps a minute. And at 9:06, a cluster of things happen. A large number of things happen right in that time frame. First of all, Maggie's phone orientation changes from vertical to horizontal. In other words, like this. It goes like that. There was an incoming call from Alec, so it wasn't just that it lit up, but that the phone actually moved. And walking was recorded on Alec's phone. The final orientation happens for Maggie. Alec calls her again, and his phone connects to his SUV, which is back at the house. The state acknowledges that there was some motion of the phone at 9:06, not just lighting up because someone called it, but some motion of the phone. The defense says, well, Alec is busy walking 283 steps, but her phone is not. If her phone was being carried by Alec back to his car and then he's going to throw it on the side of the road, they would both be walking the same number of steps because he would be carrying both of those. They say that means someone else had her phone, not Alex Murdaugh. At 9:06, Alex Murdaugh takes the car out of park and begins driving to his mother's house. That's his alibi, that he was at his mother's house. At 9:08:36, Alex did drive directly by the place where Maggie's phone was found the next day. The prosecution wanted to argue that he slowed down to throw it out, but really the testimony came out as there was sort of a smooth acceleration along the side of the road, not a pause to throw out the phone and then starting up again. At 9:22:06, Alec arrived at Alameda, his mother's house. All along the way, he was calling and texting people, and the same was true as he left from Alameda to go back to the house at Moselle, the hunting property. When he arrived at Alameda, the prosecution said yesterday that he drove toward the outbuildings first, but they didn't suggest he stopped there or did anything to hide or conceal evidence. And apparently then went to park beside the house. At least it wasn't fully explained, but that's how I understood the data. At 9:43:18, Alec's phone connects to the SUV again. In other words, he's now leaving the house. He's visited his mother for about 20 minutes, which is less time than Alec said he was there, but right at the time the caregiver said he was there, his mother's caregiver, and the vehicle starts driving. Now, the prosecution points out that the car pauses halfway down the driveway for about 1 minute. Prosecution, the law enforcement, did not search this property for weeks afterwards. And so there was nothing found there at that time that would suggest that Alex Murdaugh had tossed out bloody clothes or anything else. And the prosecution witnesses did talk about there would have been blood on Alex Murdaugh. The shorts, the shirt he was wearing did not have blood, had minimal gunshot residue, very minimal. He had 1 drop of Maggie's blood on the steering wheel, which could have come from something different. At 9:53, Chris Wilson and Alec are calling and texting each other about business. Chris Wilson is another attorney. And they talk for 2 to 3 minutes. Chris says Alex is just acting ordinary demeanor. Alex says, I'm about to get home. I'm about to lose service. We'll talk tomorrow. And then at 10, right at 10 o'clock, should have highlighted this. At 10 o'clock, Alec arrived home and he pulled in, this is important, into the Moselle house driveway, not straight to the kennels. Defense argues that's because he had no idea there had been murders out at the kennels. He pulled into the house because that's where he thought they would be. But Alex says when he realized they weren't there, he drove to the kennels to check on them. At 10:05, he began driving toward the kennels and he arrived at 10:05:57. His 911 call came a matter of just roughly 20 seconds later. There were 2 calls placed, one at 10:06:14 and one at 10:06:18. I'm not sure why, if one didn't go through or what happened, but just a brief period of time. The prosecution says that's not enough time to process the fact that 2 people are dead and you better call 911. Much less is it sufficient time to have done the things you said you did, like touch the bodies, like move the bodies, or at least start to turn them over, like check the pulse. Alex Murdaugh on the defense his side, I don't know if he'll testify, but his side may argue he did those things while calling 911. We don't really have the answer on that yet. Let me back up. So the 911 call, then he was on with the operator for a number of minutes until he began to call his family. At 10:18 to 10:28, Alec is taking 525 steps. Could be running around. He says he went and got a gun for self-protection. It's unclear whether he drove or whether he walked, but that might indicate that he walked or even ran back to the house to get the gun. At 10:20:08, Paul's phone display came on, and it happened again at 10:22. That could dovetail with what Alex said, which was he reached down to grab Paul's phone. It fell out of his pocket, out of Paul's pocket, and he picked it up, thought better of it, and put it back down on the back side of Paul. So I'm really curious, what is your impression? You can see, I'll go ahead and remove this. It is so close in time. There's no time for Alex Murdaugh really to have hidden all of the bloody clothes, much less have gotten cleaned up himself. And simultaneously, there's just almost no time for him to have not been present at the time of the murders. It's also confusing as to why, if he was back at the house, he wouldn't have heard the shot of the gun. For both prosecution and defense, the timeline is almost impossible. I am really curious. What do you think about the timeline? We're talking about this case every night at 7 o'clock after the trial. The next trial date is Tuesday. So be sure to like this video if you would and subscribe. I'd love to see you back for more.